Salvatore, thank you so much for taking the time to chat with me about Spira B. Um, it's an amazing piece. I've really enjoyed working on it for several years and touring it quite a bit and becoming quite familiar with the ins and outs of it, at least from my perspective. But feel like there are always things that as a performer maybe um, I I miss, or things that are other layers to it. And I think I learned a lot also from your program note that you'd written about the kind of more abstract concepts, both in kind of technically how it's put together and also the more kind of abstract um, kind of feeling behind the piece and the interaction between the solo line and also the electronics. So I wondered if you might be able to speak a little bit about how you got into this style of composition, perhaps in your initial interactions with electronics and how that's changed for you over time, and then maybe how this piece fits into that scheme.
Sure. Well, first of all, Jonathan, thank you so much for inviting me. It's my pleasure to be here and to talk with you. Um, it's not always a great pleasure for me personally to talk about my music because I'm never quite exactly sure what to say about it or not to say about it. But it's a pleasure to speak with you. So that makes this a very nice morning for me. And also, thank you. Uh, my profound thanks for the amount of time, care, energy, and brilliance of thought and musicianship that you put into the learning the piece, and the many times you performed it, and the wonderful recording you made of it. It touches me deeply, and it means a lot to me to have an artist of your caliber to spend that kind of time with me and my music, and believe in it and trust it, and be willing to put it forward. So thank you. That's I'm a very fortunate person to have friends and colleagues like you. So, and
Yes.
I do appreciate it deeply. I really do. Um, as far as the getting interested in electronics and that sort of thing in electronics in its interaction with music, I think there are two things that helped form my beginning mind about it. The first was really are three things I can speak about. The first one was a really, really early fascination with Les Paul and Mary Ford, who were popular guitar and guitarists and sort of pop music guys. They're wonderful, excellent, fantastic musicians, and he was a genius of electronics and pickups and all this stuff. And he was a pretty good guitar player. She was a great guitar player, and no, she really was. She was really just a great guitar player. And I remember as a kid hearing their version of How High the Moon, and which was multi-tracked. Mm. And I was just blown away by that idea, and you knew that it was multi-track because the way you heard it. I didn't know the word multi-track. I was 10 years old, but when you heard this and you heard the different iterations of it, you knew immediately it was one person, and you knew it was the same person. Making, again, layering these tracks. I didn't know the terminology, but you could hear it, and I was just completely blown away with that. And I came from, my father wasn't a professional musician, but he was a highly trained musician with a phenomenal ear, and had trained my brother and I and my cousin and my uncle to be musicians, although my dad didn't want me to be a professional musician. In fact, was quite upset when I became one for a while. He got over it, but he wasn't that thrilled. But he bought a tape recorder very, very, very early on. I probably was 7, 8 years old, 9 years old. And he bought a tape recorder, and because I don't remember who played the Les Paul Mary Ford thing for me. Maybe my brother did, maybe my dad did. I don't remember. But because I was fascinated by it, and my brother was fascinated by it, and we had this tape recorder, which was supposed to be a practice tool, by the way. My father had right from the beginning the idea that, okay, play into this tape recorder, practice your music, do your solfege, practice and listen to yourself. You see how loud you are, and then you can correct yourself. So, he was sort of hip about that kind of thing. Yeah. I wish I could. I can actually smell the tape recorder. I can smell what it smelled like in the mic, but I can't remember what the heck the name of it was. But it was one of the first ones available to for home use, right? Little 15.5, big thick tape, but not like an MPEG, a gigantic, lovely piece. But anyway, it doesn't matter. So my brother and I tried to figure out, between the two of us, and he's a much better musician than I am. He's also much more technically a droid person than I am. We both tried to figure out, meaning he tried to figure out how we could do the overlap thing. And we were basically a colossal failure at it, partly because we didn't get the technology, and partly because, you have to be a really good musician to do that well and to make it work and, play something standard and play with yourself. I mean, it was hard. So I got really fascinated by that. And then I went away for a variety of reasons. I backed away from music for a while. And when I was 15, I started playing jazz bass for a whole variety of reasons I won't go into it, but mostly because I really loved the music, and I'd listened to it since I was 3 or 4 years old at home, and was really I adored that music. And so I began to play, and I was taken to a concert where one of my first important teachers, Bert Turetsky, was playing in Hartford. A friend of mine, a bass player friend of mine. I don't think I was old enough actually to drive. I know I didn't drive. I know he drove me, but I think I was still 15. I don't think I certainly didn't have a license. Anyway, he drove me to this concert in Hartford, and at South Church in Hartford, and Bert was playing, and he was playing new music. And it was the first time I'd ever heard that. And so there was Stravinsky and Don Herb on this concert, and I think an Alban Berg piece, and some other stuff. And I was like, oh my God, what universe is that? And so I went back and told my dad, listen, I'm working, I'm playing, I've got a little bit of money. I want to go to Hartford and to take lessons with this guy. Will you drive me? And my father's, he loved me. So yeah, sure, I'll drive you. This is before I told him I wanted to be a musician. So, and I started studying with Bert, and Bert Turetsky was like this really big, gigantic Titan figure in the bass world who sort of reestablished the parameters of what being a bass player was or could be, and particularly the repertoire. The repertoire was pretty stacked, and I think he had over 350 or 400 works written for him, and then he produced all these progenies who came out, who imitated him all over the world, whether they studied with him or not. There are these people just doing similar things, and at any rate, he had just made his very first solo recording, which was oddly enough only the second solo recording made after post 1950. second bass recording he made, complete solo bass recording he made. There were only 3 in existence total at that point. One was by Kuzovitsky, one was by a guy playing Bottesini and Dragonetti on flip sides, and Bert's was the third, and there was nothing else. And so he just began doing that piece. And one of the compositions on this recording, which he gave me a copy of the recording, was this piece by Charles Wittenberg, who is now, unfortunately, sadly, a forgotten composer and a forgotten name, but was a wonderful composer and a very interesting musician and a lovely human being. In fact, I got later to know him quite well. And anyway, he had this piece called Electronic Study Number 2 for contrabass and electric tape. And actually, Charles didn't do the technical aspect of making the tape. It was actually done by Brunt Arel, who was one of the real leaders in electronic music at that time. And he was teaching at Yale when he made this particular, when he did this work for Charles. And then he went on eventually to start the studio and the program at Stony Brook. And where his partner, Darius Semigan, still teaches in that program and is still leading it. He was a real seminal figure in the development of American electronic music. Anyway, I loved all this music I was hearing, but Charles's piece, this Electronic Study Number 2 with electronics, completely knocked me out. It just really fascinated the hell out of me. And I listened to it a lot. I learned it I came out of an ear tradition, so I learned it really by ear before I ever read the music or played it, because I actually just knew it because I just heard it so many times that I could basically play it. But I eventually ended up playing it for him. Bert had a couple of times when I was probably about 19 or 20. Bert was getting busy, or he moved to California. I can't remember exactly. And Charles there were still performances. This piece happened. So Charles asked me to, Bert recommended me to Charles. I played it for Charles. I found that I loved playing it. I loved playing with electronics, and because I'd heard it so many times, it was in the old days when you had stopwatches and you were supposed to follow the stopwatch. And you wait to this point, you do this, and I found that I knew it so well by ear that I didn't need the stopwatch. Wow. That I could just play with it. It was just one of the, and so it just gave me an enormous amount of pleasure, and I loved the world, and I loved the interchange, and I loved the whole context of it, and. But then I kind of, I played, and I got very involved. I asked some other people to write pieces for me with tape and things like that. But I didn't get much into it myself because I'm a technophobe, and probably remembering very much my early experience with trying to get our tape recorder to do sound on sound. I hesitated to get into the studio myself to do all the manipulation by myself. But I studied a lot of it and I read a lot about it. So I was learning the structural world of it, how things worked and what they did, and how the filters and the envelopes and all the rest of it, how that all worked. But I was hesitant to get involved in the studio itself. And as I say, for a lot of reasons, but the technophobe thing being one. The other thing being, in those days, every sound that you made was this little construction. So might take 3.5 days to make. Yeah. And there was constant splicing and constant putting together and this and that and the other thing. And I then, as I am now, I was involved as a musician. I want to play, I want to practice, I want to write music, I want to perform, I want to play chamber music. And the thought of dedicating that number of hours to being in the studio splicing things, even though I loved the music, was I just didn't think I could find the time. I had the time or the energy, or my mind spirit thing just didn't want to quite do that at that moment. And around the same time, and a totally out of wacky coincidence, I had begun working with an early music specialist, Joseph Iadone, Iadone, was one of the great lute players of his time, one of the great musicians of his time, phenomenal musician, phenomenal ear, incredible rhythm. And oddly enough, he was working every night. He was an insomniac, and he would start around 11 o'clock at night in his little studio, and he was recording all the Renaissance music that he knew, overdubbing all of it. So he'd be playing duos and trios and
Wow,
quartets
interesting.
and overdubbing all of it,
Wow.
and he was a perfectionist. So just continue. And then he would from time to time play me some of the recordings. I mean, eventually this is all these recordings have been produced. You can buy them on the web and things like that. But they sounded great. And again that thing about the interaction between
Mm-hmm.
the listening and hearing and playing, it just knocked me out all over again. I was like, damn, I just think that's such a fantastic idea. Anyway, fast forward to 1980 or so, I became aware that Pierre Boulez had founded IRCAM, his research studio, and that one of the things that they were really interested in were thinking about the idea of interactive live electronics, where you didn't have a pre-recorded electronic tape or just a pre-recorded tape, but you would produce music live. It would be recorded and then it would be processed. The initial pieces that I heard were pretty uninteresting, frankly, because they basically just had sort of loopy ideas about them, and everything was a kind of echo and how long the echo lasted, or maybe it was just a sound reinforcement. I mean, again, the spirit of it was fascinating to me, but that music didn't totally speak to me all that much completely. But I was interested and I kept paying attention, and eventually I began to hear pieces coming out of from Boulez and composers who were associated with Eric. They really started to really fascinate me. But I was in Amherst, Massachusetts, and when I would go to Europe, I mostly would go to Italy because I had a slight thing happening in Italy where my music was being played, and I was playing concerts and stuff. But I didn't get to France very much, and to be a fellow at IRCAM was a 6 to 8 month commitment.
Oh, wow.
I had a job at the university. I had just recently married and had a child. I couldn't exactly even conceive of the idea of doing that at that point. But at some point, and actually Yusef Latif gets into this, but in a weird way. So at some point, I had met a young student, Matt Waugh, very interesting person, graduated from Hampshire College, was quite interested in electronics, live electronics in particular, and was a Mac person. The Max is this program that was developed at IRCAM for live interaction stuff. And Matt had gone to Hampshire College, and there he met Yusef, and he started to work with Yusef, both studying composition, but also doing concerts with Yusef as a live electronics thing, where they had this interactive thing. But Matt wanted to come to UMass and get a master's degree in composition, and he didn't have much of a portfolio, but he was an interesting person. And Yusef called me one night and said, "Listen, I think this person's the real thing. You should really seriously consider taking him as a student." So I said, "Okay, if you're telling me is what you're saying, then Yusef, that's it. He's in. Don't worry about it. I'm cool. Don't worry about it." So I took Matt, and we got along very, very, very well. And he was an interesting student. He was very bright. He was a good musician. He would tell me from time to time about what he was working with on Macs and all that kind of stuff, and I found it really fascinating. And eventually, after he graduated, and we started doing concerts together, sort of the same kind of stuff I do with Jazer now, but Matt was the first person I did that with. And so we would do concerts where I would play some unaccompanied bass solo pieces, to play such bass solo pieces, maybe something with with a pre-composed tape part, and then he and I would improvise. And so I really got my fixation and amorous feelings for this medium kept growing, and at some point, I don't know, I expressed my displeasure to him that I didn't have the technical skills, the computer technical skills to deal with it. And he said, "Well, look, actually, you don't really need them. If you can figure out how to notate out what you want, and make sure you know where all the filters are and all the things are, you can just write it out, and we can do this." I said, "Really?" He said, "Yeah, absolutely." So we experimented with it, and I wrote a piece called a flute piece called Arcanum 7, which is a fixed electronic piece, and I wrote it for Fabio Baccelli, who's a great flute player, great, really fantastic Italian flute player. You can hear this on YouTube. There's an inter-ensemble website, and he's got a live recording of it that's really spectacular. And so I wrote everything out. I mean, I literally wrote everything out, and I told Matt all the filtering things that I wanted to do. And so he went and did the filtering things and produced the electronics, and it worked. You know, it worked pretty well. It was limited. It wasn't totally what I wanted, and because in those days the Max patches were not as fantastically sophisticated as they are now. We ended up recording like a whole series of concrete sounds that we then synthesized and then used inside it. And so it had kind of somewhat of a unique sound world, although, as I said, it didn't completely satisfy what I wanted in my imagination, but it was a step in the right direction. So I did a few of those. There were some people who asked me for other pieces. I did them, and then eventually I said to Matt, I really like to write a piece for live electronics, and I'll write it for myself. But I'll, but if I think this is the way I can notate it, and would you be able to build patches from this idea? And he said yes. And so I wrote a piece for myself, the title of which I don't remember anymore. It was kind of an etude thing happening for live electronics, and so it started to work, and from that point on, I began to really, I began to develop this confidence, both in that I could how to write pieces in this particular way, but also how to do the interactive stuff with the computer and the live player. And then someone asked me to write a violin. Liz Chang asked me to write a violin once. Some other people asked me to write other ones, and a kind of whole series of these things have sort of developed, over the years. Matt went on to do some other work in his life. And I was fortunate to meet another very good friend and now colleague, Jason Giles, who's also exceedingly good at the mechanics of this stuff. And Jason and I was at one point a fairly active duo. Nothing's very active right now, so not sure. Right, I'm not sure where we are with that, but he actually built the Max codes for your piece, which is, I think, from 2014. So that's 6 years ago, and I think there's probably a dozen. Well, I don't think a dozen, but probably eight pieces since then, using interactive electronics and things. And we have gotten a little bit more sophisticated in our notation abilities and our ability to help the performer deal with the intricacies that are going on, and so the process has been growing now.
Yeah, that's really interesting. I remember working really closely with Jazer to try to get the electronics working and working with you and those kinds of rehearsal processes. I remember there was one small issue where the harmonizer would come in. I think it was coming in with me instead of on the opposite thing.
Right.
And I really and I know it was not correct, but I loved it. It felt so powerful to play with all of those saxophones at the same time.
I have such a feeling of guilt about the fact that I didn't let you have that. Because I remember that very well, and I felt really guilty. I felt really badly. I did a lot of soul searching after that, thinking, really, Macchia, you really have to be like, what? Really? Does it really? Aesthetically, is it that important?
I think it is.
I think it is. I think it is.
I completely agree with the decision.
No, I think it is too. But I had a difficult time with it for a while. I was like, God,
Oh, no.
But I think it was the right thing.
So I mean, with your live electronics pieces, do you use a similar palette of sounds and, for lack of a better word, effects, or has that shifted for you over time?
It's considerably shifted because Max has really improved, and the whole internal synth workings in Max is amazingly advanced. And so I don't use any of my own concrete sounds anymore, and I don't synthesize anything anymore because they're one of the problems I have with those pieces, and some of them I'm proud of, but in terms of pieces, but maybe I would maybe want to revise the electronics parts of them at some point or not. was that the synthesis itself, when you would do whatever you were doing, if I were harmonizing something, if I were doing retrograde inversions of things, if I were splicing certain parts of the partials to knock out, the third degree, but reinforce the sixth degree and emphasize 9, but make 11 less, whatever it might be. It always sounded artificial. It in a way that it always sounded as if it were being manipulated, but not the right way, but it sounded like manipulated in the way that was like sort of a bad vibrato on a string instrument, or continually writing low C sharps for an oboe. It's like, it just doesn't sound good. It just, no matter who's playing, I don't care. It just doesn't sound good. And it always had that timbral thing that bothered me. And of course, these pieces are about the pieces. I think of myself as a composer who's primarily interested in pitch and what happens to pitch, but certainly rhythm and timbre are very, very important to me. And in these electronic pieces, both fixed electronic and live electronic pieces, obviously timbre is an enormous factor, right? The quality of the sound and what the sound is like is an enormous factor. And in some of those earlier pieces, I was disappointed at the when the instrument would play, we'd have this wonderful sound, someone like yourself would be playing, it'd be fantastic. And then the tape would come back, and the response would come back, and it was less than what I wanted in terms of, and I think that's gotten a lot better. I mean, I'm sorry, go ahead.
Oh, that's just so in both of those cases, it's you're talking about captures and playbacks of this.
Yeah, in this case, captures and playbacks. Yeah, which work much better now on Macs, and the software itself has come up a lot better. Also, microphones have improved, and the kinds of, like the kind of microphone that you're using, or the kind of microphone that I use myself on the double bass, they really work so much better than they did before. I mean, we used to have to put a freestanding mic, and it would catch the feedback, and it would catch the noise, and it wasn't such a good thing. Yeah. And so it's really improved.
It's a real trip as a performer to listen to something that you played 9 minutes ago, come back, and then kind of it's a very kind of human experience, I think, to hear this thing with all of its foibles and all of its glory, like whatever it was in that moment, and having it come back. I've really enjoyed playing it live and remembering, oh, this is the one where it's got this maybe some more intensity in the sound, or it's a little grittier, or like, oh, I remember I played this line much more smoothly, and it's kind of fun to almost spin out, each time your own version of the piece.
Well, that's exactly the point, right? That's exactly the point. The point is that it and that's one of the things I love about the live electronic stuff. And of course, it was one of Blais's points about when he was formulating these ideas about these things, is that you could have something that was at one point pretty static, and at the other hand, continually evolving and always in some way really different. But all music is like that, of course, obviously, right? Right. Everything is always changing. Every performance is slightly different. Everything happens in a different manner. And I think what's particularly like that is chamber music. And I have a real passion for playing chamber music, for listening to chamber music, for being part of a chamber music ensemble, et cetera, et cetera. And one of my ideas in these pieces is to make us be able to play chamber music with ourselves, and to connect with ourselves in that way, and to do a deep listening for ourselves. I think now, as a 73-year-old man, I think back on my fascination with this when I was 7 or 8 or 9 years old, and I think the fascination is the same that I had then as it is now. Is that idea of like, wow, man, that person is listening to themselves play. They're playing with themselves. They're laying on top. They have to have the time, the energy, all that stuff going, and yet they're creating something completely different than what they had to begin with. And it just fascinated me, and it still fascinates me. And the idea of this interaction, of this idea of this kind of listening and paying attention to yourself in such a way that you have to react and your humanness of your reaction. You're not reacting to, anybody who's played chamber music will know that, you play with somebody and they do something and it's a mistake. And sometimes that mistake is glorious and you're really happy and it really plays into something fantastic. And sometimes you make a mistake and you're like really mad. you know, but that's happening with this kind of in this music as well. And it's in some ways it might be perhaps magnified, that interactive feeling, because it is indeterminate, because you're playing at the moment, so you're doing what you're doing, but now it's fixed, at least for this pass through. Mm-hmm. So now you have to relate to the fix, and you have to deal with it. I mean, one of the things when I play these pieces myself, one of the things, particularly when I first started, if I make a mistake and then I'd have to hear the damn thing come back,
I know. Practicing this piece was very annoying in that particular regard.
It's like, oh man, damn it, okay, I heard it, I know I made a mistake. Stop already with it. Yeah, no, it's really, that's a trip unto itself, right? But it's also it's a kind of learning process, a continual learning process. But that mobility that these pieces offer, that opportunity of change is I think exciting, and I think it I know that I have improved as a musician, although God knows I've got, I won't live long enough to do enough improvement to ever get anything actually seriously done. But I believe that this actually, working with this stuff as a performer and as a composer, actually has helped me musically a lot. Writing these pieces, since I'm not notating the playbacks, right? When I'm writing them, I'm just simply imagining them. I'm not notating them, because I don't want to do that, because I don't want to fix them, right? In my most recent scores, I do an approximation, but it's simply an approximation to show because I think it actually makes it easier to learn, to show the performer what they can expect when they're actually doing the playbacks and they're hearing this stuff. But I also make it very clear that this is just an approximation, and you don't aim for this.
Right.
Do not aim for this. This is not the goal. It's just sort of what could maybe happen, But I do that afterwards. I don't do that when I'm writing. I do that. I come back and I kind of do it by ear and thinking, okay, that if this is 3 seconds, this will probably happen. This, but okay.
That's interesting.
Because I try to imagine it entirely in my head and hear the thing coming back and hear the potential for the information coming back, and keep it free. So in a way, it's harder composing because you really have to remember a tremendous amount while you're working on it, and the possibilities, because you have to think, okay, if it's a little late when it comes in, what will happen if I'm looking for this? What will happen to this? I have to buffer this, and I got to take care of. I mean, there's just other things to think about. And as you know, I recently did a version of this piece because it was really a COVID thrusted project, because I've forgotten exactly. I think it was like in August. I was having a little bit of trouble with my concentration and a little bit of trouble with. I mean, I've been writing a lot, thankfully, just because it keeps what I do. But I had a problem around August. I was pretty depressed about everything that was happening, and really feeling housebound and starved for music and everything else. And I was actually sitting right now, and I'm pretty sure I was on a Zoom call, frankly. And it suddenly dawned on me that it would be kind of a cool thing, and maybe sort of jumpstart my brain a little bit, if I scored Spira out for a small chamber ensemble, sort of in the spirit of Berio, rewriting those things and bringing things out. So I did actually, and I know I haven't shared it with you yet, but I will. And so I made a version of Spira C that's for I think it's 12 instruments, solo saxophone and 12 instruments, and the saxophone part it has one more bar than this piece.
I don't know.
Right. Sorry about that, but it's an easy note at the end, so it's okay.
Very good. Yeah.
It's a nice concert B flat. It's cool. I had to work out a non-plastic, a fixed version of how all these things were going to go, and and that was really interesting. And I used all my directions. So if it says delay this much seconds, so I plotted everything that way, the way I had said it. But then I was able to think, okay, so just like what happens to the tape, just like happens when you record it, there are these interface things that would happen with timing and phrasing and ideas, and so I felt that it could actually be really quite newly creative if that's allowed, as I came up with these ideas. And since I was writing, essentially it's a small chamber ensemble of winds and strings and harp and piano, and this I found that I could do the timbre thing that the solo version does, but I could actually do it in an amplified way because I actually had all these different timbres. Right. So it was kind of a fascinating thing. But even having done that, and I'd be curious to see what you think when I give it to you and I show it to you, when I finally finish editing it, because I had to put it aside, the editing aside, the piece is done. I had to put the editing aside to do a couple other things. But when I get back and I edit it, I'd be curious what your impression of what you hear in the score when you see it. Because it makes it a different work. It's sort of like those chemins of Berio, or the different sequenza versions, they really become different pieces.
Oh yeah, quite different.
They become.
I learned the chemins, the fourth one, before I learned the seventh sequenza, and so I had already done a performance or two of that piece with ensemble before going back and then having to deal with time in a completely different way.
Right.
I found that I had to kind of like really loosen up the kind of guts of it in some ways in order to have it like actually turn into the sequenza the way it's supposed to be.
Right.
I mean, because those pieces, they have so much. I mean, there's some stuff that's very like precisely rhythmically notated, and then there's things that just says approximately a third of the way between this 2.7 second thing, and otherwise it's just like and
it's not the thing.
Yeah.
And this will be, if it ever gets read or played or something, this will be somewhat the opposite, where you actually
I'm really curious about that.
Right, where you have to switch that thing a little bit and make it a little bit not ever mechanical, because that's never musical, but more misura like, as opposed to sensi misura. But not that you always play with beautiful rhythm, so I don't say. But it's the point of the timing that you're talking about that was one of the reasons why these are different. Yeah.
Yeah. No, I mean, I think I think I'm going to be really interested in seeing how that goes, because I remember learning this piece far too strictly at first, and then I mean there were some things that I really needed to kind of tighten up.
Sure.
But in terms of my approach to it, it was very metered, very much trying to get these 10, 12 notes in this certain amount of time, and I think my musicianship grew a lot. I think there were so many notes on the page that I think I started out pretty much just from an athletic perspective, trying to get the thing hammered into some kind of shape, and wasn't really listening very hard. And also, I think it was challenging until I could really get the whole piece under my fingers. I couldn't really do it with the electronics, because you can't start partway through and keep going. You have to do it from the beginning. So that process was really fascinating, and get to be like, wow, okay, this music doesn't sound anything the way that I thought it sounded. It doesn't have the same kind of, meaning, really.
Right.
So, but now kind of maybe putting some more time bounds on it would be quite interesting.
It'll just change it. By the way, Max has come up with this way, and Jazer has built it into the. We should give you a new patch, because there's actually a way now to start anywhere you want.
Oh, beautiful.
Yeah.
That sounds really fun.
Yeah. It's real simple. It's just you look at the number of quotes and go back one before, and then you're set. So.
Got it.
That's a big help, because that was a big problem in the early years of this stuff, that you couldn't begin in the middle. You just simply had to go back to the beginning.
Right.
And then you had to do you had to get rid of everything, otherwise it would override the system, and that was a practical performance practice problem, which is fortunately no longer in existence.
So looking ahead, if it's even possible, I mean, we're in the middle of this election, we're in the middle of this pandemic, we're in the middle of the protests and so many different things going on.
Yes, right.
Um, I don't even know if there is another side. I kind of formulated this question thinking, well, it's like, okay, so this is going to end and then what? But it's like most of this stuff has always been going on, especially with the, civil rights issues and then, the pandemic maybe we'll see some progress on. Politics is what it is. But I guess I'm kind of wondering if there's a sense for you of how these different things that are going on in the world might be integrating or separating, and when we are able to have live music again, maybe some changes that you might imagine taking place or things going back to normal. Do you have any thoughts about that?
Well, I don't think things can go back to normal, nor do I think they should go back to normal, frankly. Um, I, I'm, I'm old enough to be pessimistic, but I am hopefully enough of a humanist to be positive about potential for growth. And I do find that the just politically, socially, that the commitment of, of young people, our students at UMass, as an example, the commitment to racial justice and to justice across the board, whether it's um, uh, women's rights, gay rights, black rights, transgender rights, just all those things together, put together. There seems to be a significant energy that is pushing those things forward. There also seems to be an incredible recalcitrance among a certain segment of our population that is terrified of these things, that is so afraid of them and are so threatened by them. But um, I do think we have the potential of doing of making some significant and major changes. I cannot, I worry about what the, the marketplace solution to things will be when we get back to something that approaches normal, right? That I worry what's going to happen to concert venues, to orchestras, to where chamber music happens, to jazz clubs, to whatever, you name it. If it's not immediately highly viable commercial music and pop music, most of which is very good and wonderful and fine, but if it's not that, I worry what might go on. But on the other hand, uh, if we think about what happened during the Enlightenment and the shifts that happened in the idea of how music was, originally completely bound up with church life, at least the music of notated music was totally bound up in church life. And then it spread out a bit and became part of the aristocratic milieu, right? And then as the Enlightenment began to unfold and happen, it moved into more what we would now consider middle class and bourgeoisie, how you want to do it. So these things have happened before, and we've responded artistically to them, I think, and socially well, not completely. We've got so many problems and so many troubles that we have not solved, and honestly, in America, the racial and homophobic problem is just enormous. It's just enormous, and it's not going to go away completely anytime soon. It just isn't. But I think that the younger generation of musicians and thinkers and students, I think that they're going to find a way to solve these problems that were happening. The capital orientation of what we do may have to switch, and frankly, I think that would be a good thing. Mm-hmm. That if we could figure out a way to do that, I think that would really be healthy and it would really be well. I don't know how one does that exactly, but if we can work towards that kind of thing, I think it's good. I also think that through these times, I think that people I think that sensitive, interested, creative people tend to look inside themselves and tend to ask themselves questions about the relevance of what they do and to whom and why they're doing it, and who, to whom they're speaking. And now certainly not everyone's going to come up and say, okay, I've just done this last thing for the last 45 years and I've been speaking to the wrong people. I need to change. I mean, okay, we can't ask people to do that either, right? But I think a lot of people will be asking those kinds of questions of themselves and being willing to um, 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 strike out towards new boundaries, new areas, new levels of interaction, and bridge things more. I
I mean, you've mentioned a few names of, I think one of them you kind of referred to as a wonderful and forgotten composer, unfortunately. And I guess I'm curious, you know, who's been here and whose names are we not remembering so well?
Well, I
Um,
think there are a lot of. I think that I think that's a very tricky question, a tricky issue,
mm,
and I think it's one that while we should have it in our minds in some place, in some ways, it's also one I'm pretty sure that we can't do anything about.
mm,
I think that the remembrance of. I mean, there are two problems. Maybe there are three problems. Um, let's say using 1900 as a boundary marker, there has been a remarkably small amount of music written by whoever. I don't. It doesn't really matter. Remarkably small amount of music that has actually taken the imagination of people on a large scale.
oh, I see what you're saying. Yeah, yeah.
Right, very small amount of music, much less than ever before. You know, and it's never been all that great, by the way, right? But it's a much lesser scale, and and you can count really, on one hand, pretty much the composers who up to this point have survived that that accounting, that public, that thing about public taste. So that's already narrowed considerably than what it was, and I think to a large extent that's about that's an economic problem, an economic social problem more than really anything else.
Mm,
How expensive it is to present concerts, how expensive it is to buy a ticket, how expensive recordings is, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Um, but but here the optimist in me wants to come out in the end and to say that I think 70 years from now, 80 years from now, if we don't blow the planet up, if we don't, and if we do something about global warming and we still have a world we can live in, because I'm not so sure that we're going to have such a place in 70, 80, 90 years. But if we do, and in which case we don't have a place in 90 years, then all this doesn't matter anyway, right? But if we
yeah.
do, and we reconstitute ourselves as humans, um, I don't. I'm sure there'll be a way of recalibrating what the individual works of art, whether they're music or literature or anything else, meant to the time, and there'll be a new way of figuring that out, just as we're going through this thing now where which is a wonderful thing, where we're finding this incredibly, particularly in literature and in painting, we're finding this treasure trove of women authors and women paintings, people going back to the Renaissance, right?
Mm,
Who were really major, wonderful artists, and they have been lost to us for all the wrong reasons. But we're starting to find out about them. We're starting to learn about them. Starting to get a whole new appreciation of the cultural milieu. I mean, going back to the 1940s in England, let's say, where there were these large groups of incredibly forward-thinking, I'll use the word feminist, but authors who were not Virginia Woolf. There were these other authors, wonderful writers, and they're now becoming more and more into prominence. We know that there is we all know about James Baldwin and a few other Ralph Ellison, other black writers, but there's I just was this morning reading about three or four authors I'd never heard of from the early 20th century who were publishing 1901, 1902 major tracks. I mean, I never heard of these people, right? I've written their names down. I'm going to go, try to find them in the library and try to read some of this stuff. And so we're finding these things, and so I think that larger cultural thing, that larger cultural spin, takes a while to happen, and I think it probably will. And I do think that the younger generations, when we're done with this and we go back in to stuff, everything will be different, but there might also be things that are better about it.
Yeah, I certainly hope so.
Me too.
Well, thank you so much for your time and for sharing about these works and your experience and electronics and the people and the places. And it's really been a pleasure speaking with you.
It's always my pleasure, Jonathan. And we'll talk again very soon, I hope.
Okay, sounds good.
All right. And one of these days we'll play music together again.
I cannot wait.
Me too.
Okay. All right.
Bye-bye.